Hi, this is Tim Jones coming to you from Seattle in the United States with my dear friend across the world, Hamad Hassan. And today we're going to talk a little bit about some more wars that the United States has gotten in on. We previously talked about the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, which were two important wars in our history that most people would agree war is not good, but these wars had to be fought to start our nation and to save our nation. But now we're going to start talking about some other wars. And now it starts getting a little more gray as to whether these were good wars or unnecessary wars. And Hamad is going to be the host, and he's going to interview me, and I'll do my best to answer the questions as best as I can. So Hamad, I'm going to pass it to you.
Okay, thank you, Tim. So when we talk about United States of America, then we also talk about the wars which were fought by the United States of America. So we will start from the Vietnam War. So my first question from you is that why did the United States enter a war in Vietnam? Had Vietnam attacked the United States to provoke your country into a war?
The Vietnam War is a war that most Americans feel we should never have gotten involved in. We as a country, our government was concerned about the increasing power of China and the communist influence in Asia. And it had, at the time, there was a North Vietnam and a South Vietnam. Now there's just one country called Vietnam. But at the time, in the 1950s and the early 60s, North Vietnam had turned communist and had turned sympathetic to China. And they were having their own civil war between the North and the South Vietnam. And we decided to get involved on the side of South Vietnam, which was sort of a democracy. I put that in quotes because it wasn't very democratic. But our general principle for wars is that we believe in getting in wars to protect our country, to protect our national security. And a lot of people would argue that our national security was not at risk in the Vietnam War, and therefore we should never have gotten into it. So we really were not provoked. We chose to enter in this conflict because we were concerned that China's influence was expanding, and they were going to take over South Vietnam too.
So you are saying that the United States sided what was then called South Vietnam in its civil war with the North Vietnam.
That's right.
Why did the United States sided with South Vietnam and not with the North Vietnam?
Because at the time, North Vietnam had already become a communist regime. I think the leader of that country was called Ho Chi Minh, and he was very sympathetic to China. China had a lot of influence over North Vietnam, and North Vietnam and South Vietnam were fighting. And if North Vietnam won, South Vietnam would now come under China's communist influence too. South Vietnam was not sympathetic to China, and so therefore that's why we sided with South Vietnam and not North Vietnam.
What you consider that overall was United States successful in this war? Did the United States won the war?
The United States was not successful. The United States did not win this war. Some people might argue that it was sort of a tie. It was not. The United States lost this war. We were involved in the war heavily from about 1963 to about, 1969. Actually, I think 1973 we had the final peace accord. So it went through about 10 years of fighting. In the end, we did reach a peace agreement to basically withdraw. We did not win this war. We lost this war, and thousands of American soldiers and, of course, Vietnamese soldiers died in the process. Approximately 200,000 to 250,000 South Vietnamese soldiers died, and approximately 58,000 American soldiers were either killed or went missing in action and had never been found in the war. So it was a very bloody, very costly, very prolonged war, which ultimately accomplished nothing for the United States.
Now, the United States still think that the Republic of Vietnam is the enemy of United States.
Are you asking about at the time or now?
No.
Now
in 2022.
Now, actually, we have decent relations with Vietnam. It's one country now. It's no longer North and South. It's just Vietnam. But I would say that generally speaking, we have civil relations with Vietnam. We trade with them. We have an ambassador to Vietnam. Vietnam has an ambassador to the United States. So despite the horrible history we had in the 1960s and early 1970s, I would say the two countries are no longer adversaries.
Okay. Overall, what the people in United States think that it was a popular war among the people, or it was a notorious war?
Well, initially there was a fair amount of support for the war because they had been told by the government that we're doing this to protect our country and to stop communism from expanding around the world. So, of course, you're going to have a fair number of Americans go, yay, we hate communism. So, yes, let's support the war. Let's support our troops. But as time went on, and it became clear that we were not winning this war and we were just sending our young men to die, the tide of popularity turned against the war. And probably by like 1965, 1966, the sentiment really shifted greatly. So much so that the president at the time, a gentleman named President Lyndon Johnson, decided not to run for re-election because he was in many ways a great president. He did some wonderful things, but he got us into a war that was became very, very unpopular. And that's why he decided not to run for re-election in 1968. So yeah, definitely in the end, you'll find virtually no one who will say, in hindsight, looking back, this was a good idea. So
from 1975, now we are jumping into the 21st century. And in 2001, the United States invaded Afghanistan. Why did United States go to war with Afghanistan in 2001?
Well, this gets very confusing. Because we also went to war with Iraq at roughly the same time. We went into war with Iraq a little bit later. I think it was 2003 we started. It's all okay. There's many reasons. There's the official reason, and then there was the reason we were told. The reason we were told that we went into both Iraq and Afghanistan was because of Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda and the threat to our country that based on what happened on September 11th, 2001, when they attacked the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, and there was another plane. So in theory, there was a case to be made that this was about retaliation and to crush the Taliban, to crush Al-Qaeda, and to capture and punish Osama bin Laden. The problem is, long after we ever captured and killed Osama bin Laden, we stayed in Afghanistan. And they were not really a threat. In my opinion, they were not really a major threat to our national security. We had dealt Al-Qaeda a major blow. So this was an unwinnable war. There are certain cultures where democracy just does not flourish. And it is my belief, now I'm just talking about my belief, that Afghanistan has been ruled over by so many external forces for so much of its history, including Russia, that they've always rebelled against, understandably, anybody else telling them how to run their country. And they're not oriented towards democratic government the way, the United States and many countries around the world are. This was a war that really, the Taliban just kind of outlasted us. Whenever we finally gave up, they were just going to come back in and take over. And that's exactly what happened.
So since it was proven that Osama bin Laden was spotted by Afghanistan, but not by Iraq. So why the United States go to war with Iraq in 2003?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question and a very controversial question, because we were told by the government that Saddam Hussein had been supporting Al-Qaeda and that he had weapons of mass destruction, and we were afraid that he would use them on the United States. He might attack the United States. Saddam Hussein, no matter what you say, he was a bad man. He was a horrible dictator. He was cruel to his country, especially the Kurdish people in the north. He was a bad dude. But turns out he did not have weapons of mass destruction. Turns out he had nothing to do with the Taliban or Al-Qaeda. In fact, he didn't like them any more than we did. So we went to war with Iraq under false pretenses. A lot of people think we went to war with Iraq to go after their oil. I don't know if that's true or not, but that would not surprise me. One theory is that George Bush, who was the president at the time, wanted to take out Saddam Hussein because years earlier, George Bush's father, George Herbert Walker Bush, who was the president from 1988 to 1992, Saddam Hussein had tried to assassinate George Bush Sr. So some people think that George Bush Jr., George W. Bush, who was the president at the time, was seeking revenge on Saddam Hussein because he tried to kill his father. Who knows what the real reason was? But I think most people would argue that, Iraq collapsed pretty quickly. Saddam Hussein was captured. His sons were captured. The problem is we had a plan for war. We did not have a plan for how to maintain the peace afterwards. And that was the problem. The rivalry between the Shia and the Sunni Muslims, and then also to some extent the Kurds, we were not prepared for how to maintain a peace in a very divided society. So again, this was a war that probably we should never have gotten into in the first place, ever.
So the same question I have, that were the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan popular among the American people, or were they viewed as the unnecessary wars by most Americans?
Initially, both wars were very popular because, as is very common in any country, when it feels attacked, they tend to rally around their president or their prime minister as they declare war on the attacker. So if you can understand the American psyche at the time of 2001 was, we've been invaded. This has not happened. So we haven't had war in our soil since the Civil War, with the exception of the bombing of Hawaii, Pearl Harbor in Hawaii in World War II by Japan. With that little narrow exception, there has not been war in our soil for over 100 years, 150 years almost. And so when we were attacked on 9/11, there was a lot of enthusiasm to go to war with anybody we thought was behind it. And at the time, the Americans were told that Afghanistan was behind it and Iraq was behind it. Well, it is true Afghanistan was a safe harbor to Al-Qaeda. They did allow these people to develop their troops and stuff in Afghanistan. Iraq had nothing to do with it. Initially, both wars were popular. Over time, both wars became very unpopular, extremely unpopular. Most Americans have been wanting to get out of Afghanistan for the last 15 or more years. Really, as important and critical as the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, those would be what I would call moral, ethical wars that we had to fight. The Iraq War and the Afghanistan War were wars we should never have been in the first place, ever.
Why does the United States tend to get involved in so many wars with other countries?
That's another great question. There's a couple reasons, and I'm not defending them. I'm just explaining these reasons. The United States has taken the stance that we are sort of the world's policemen, that it's our job to go after the bad guys wherever they may be. But we're very inconsistent with that policy. If there's something we're getting from that country, we may look the other way to some of the way they treat their people. But usually it comes down to political self-interest, sometimes economic self-interest. So a lot of these wars that we've been talking about have to do at some point, how much of this is a noble cause to protect our security. I think going into Afghanistan initially, there was legitimate concern that they were a source of creating terrorists, and we wanted to attack any country that was going to send terrorists at us. So I can understand, at least initially, why we went after Afghanistan. The case of Iraq, I think our motives might have had to do with oil. They might have had to do with revenge against Saddam Hussein. They were not good enough reasons. I think you're seeing with the current administration a more cautious approach to going to war. For example, Joe Biden has said many times, we are not going to send troops to Ukraine because that could escalate the risk of a world war between the United States and Russia, both of which have nuclear weapons. So he has made it clear, we will support the Ukrainian people. We will give them arms. We will give them military aid. We will give them training. We will not send troops. So I think that's the difference between the way our current president sees the world and some other presidents. I'm convinced that if Donald Trump were the president today, he would not have come to the aid of Ukraine. He would have not gotten the support of NATO, and Russia would have steamrolled over Ukraine by now, and it would have been completely capitulated, and Russia would have taken Ukraine by now if Donald Trump were the president. That's my belief.
There is a last question from my side, and it is a little tough question for you. Why the Americans, when we compare the American wars, that Americans attack the countries which were not in their interest, which were against their national security. So when we see Russia is also doing the same thing. Russia thinks that Ukraine is against the national security of Russia, and he's invading, and Russia is invading Ukraine. So how we justify that reason when we are American?
I can't justify us going into. I mean, I think it makes sense to go to war with a country if we have been provoked, or if we have reasonable intelligence that says they might plan to attack us. I'll give you an example of one that is very scary for our country, and that's North Korea. North Korea has been very belligerent, doing all these nuclear tests. They now have missiles that we believe can reach the United States. Oddly enough, places like Seattle, where I live on the West Coast, are within the range of North Korea's missiles, we believe, at this time. So there's a country that has made no secret about the fact that they hate the United States. They feel threatened by the United States, and therefore they're going to arm themselves to protect themselves against their fear that the United States may attack them. So that gets into some very difficult situations. But if we do not have a security threat that we perceive from another country, my personal belief is we should generally stay out of it. However, now that I say that, I will be the first to tell you, I'm glad we're doing what we are to support Ukraine. Russia, Vladimir Putin, in my opinion, feels that the former great Soviet Union was dismantled to the great shame of the Russian people, and he wants to try to build it back together, starting with Ukraine. If he was successful taking back Ukraine, I'd be concerned about Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. I'd be concerned about Romania. I fear that he might go after many other countries if he has success in Ukraine.
Also, in future we will live in a world which will be free of wars. So that were my questions from my side. And have you any questions which I can answer?
No, but if you can figure out a way how to get Americans to embrace gun control legislation, if you can get our Congress to do it, I'd love to know the answer, because the American people.
We will have a full session on this topic.
Yeah.
Maybe next.
Yes. It's a topic.
Right now for our viewers. If you have some words, then you can share with our viewers.
Yes. Well, I think that's enough for now. So I think we're going to move away from the topic of wars and look at some other topics in the episodes to come. And I want to thank our host, Hamad Hassan, for your excellent questions. I wish my answers were as good as your questions. And we'll look forward to talking to you at another time very soon. Thank you, Hamad. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.